Plenty of female assassins have made it into the history books, each one their own tale to tell as they've wielded guns, blades, and other deadly weapons against some high-profile targets. Keep watching to discover the most notorious female assassins of all time. Born in New Jersey in 1936 and played by Lily Taylor in the film I Shot Andy Warhol, Valerie Solanas was terrifyingly intelligent and fearless from a young age. A rebellious teenager, she thrived in college, enrolling in a master's program in psychology. But she dropped out after a year, drawn to the 1960s New York City art scene. She then started writing. Her Scum manifesto extolled the virtues of a world without men, and her play Up Your Ass featured a savvy lesbian sex worker. She tried to convince Andy Warhol to produce her play, but he had other plans. So on June 3, 1968, Solanas waited for Warhol outside his studio, and when he arrived, she joined him in the elevator and shot him.
Drew a weapon and fired and shot Mr. Warhol. And then with the gun, she exited by way of the elevator, and she's disappeared up to the present time.
Warhol survived, but had to wear a surgical corset the rest of his life. Afterwards, Solanas wandered around outside, eventually confessing, saying that Warhol had too much control over her life. She was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, was institutionalized, and served some jail time. Much of her later life was spent homeless, and she died of pneumonia in San Francisco in 1988. Up Your Ass was finally staged posthumously at a San Francisco theater in 2000. Born in 1890 in Ukraine, Fanny Kaplan had all the makings of a revolutionary. Living in a world where the Russian government was on the verge of collapse, she spent her youth mingling with anarchist and socialist revolutionary groups. She was arrested for terrorism in 1906 and then spent a decade in Siberian labor camps. By 1917, Russia's Tsarist government fell apart and Kaplan was released, but she wasn't pleased with the world around her. A member of the Socialist Revolutionary Party, she favored the democratically elected Constituent Assembly. But Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks felt otherwise, as they dissolved the Constituent Assembly, aimed for a Bolshevik dictatorship, and signed a treaty that gave in to German and Austro-Hungarian demands. Altogether, Kaplan saw Lenin as a danger to Russia. On August 30, 1918, she found him shortly after he'd given a speech at the Hammer and Sickle factory. She shot him 3 times, hitting him in the arm and neck, and he was whisked away to the Kremlin. Meanwhile, she was captured, then taken for 3 days of torture and interrogation. She stuck to her story that she acted alone, refusing to implicate any other socialist revolutionaries, and she was executed on September 3rd. The French Revolution was a bit of a mess, to say the least. It's also a mess that's been immortalized in art, and one of those pieces, The Death of Marat, comes with quite a story behind it. Jean-Paul Marat was a voice for the radical side of the French Revolution. He rejected much of the social order, calling for the complete fall of the aristocracy while refuting more moderate revolutionaries. He also saw himself as a martyr, and a martyr he would indeed become. Charlotte Corday was born into a once aristocratic family, and she came to hate all that Marat stood for. So she traveled to Paris, intending to kill him at the Bastille Day parade on July 14, 1793, only for the festivities to be cancelled. Undeterred, she managed to solicit an interview with him. On July 13, 1793, she found him in the bath, pulled a knife from her bodice, and stabbed him in the chest, killing him instantly. In the aftermath, Corday let the police arrest her, and she was guillotined 4 days later. Lynette "Squeaky" Fromme was a member of the Manson family who achieved a fair bit of notoriety for her attempted assassination of President Gerald Ford. In 1967, a then 19-year-old Fromme hitchhiked to Venice, California, where she met Charles Manson and became a loyal follower of his. During his trial for the 1969 Tate LaBianca killings, she stood outside the courthouse with an X carved into her forehead and spent time in jail to protect him. And that wasn't the only jail time Fromme served. On September 5, 1975, she met Gerald Ford at Sacramento's Capitol Park to talk about the California redwoods. She brandished a loaded pistol in his face, which a Secret Service agent immediately grabbed from her. At her trial, she didn't cooperate with her own defense, pleading not guilty of attempted assassination on the grounds that the gun was loaded but not cocked. The cartridge had been intentionally ejected, and she'd apparently never intended to shoot. Nevertheless, she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. She served 34 years and was released on parole in 2009, apparently still in love with Manson.
And I know how that sounds to people who think he's the epitome of evil.
It's no stretch to say that Gerald Ford had an eventful September 1975. Only 17 days after his encounter with Lynette Fromme, he was the target of another would-be assassin. That was Sarah Jane Moore, an unassuming 45-year-old woman whom the Secret Service had already evaluated, determining that she posed little threat. Nevertheless, on September 21st, she had her firearm confiscated on an illegal handgun charge. It wasn't enough. The next day, on September 22nd, Ford was leaving a World Affairs Council meeting at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco when Moore fired at him from 40 feet away. The The first shot missed his head by 5 inches. Her second went astray when a bystander grabbed her arm before she could pull the trigger. The police apprehended her and Ford was unharmed. But it could have gone very differently. It's believed that Moore had been busy practicing her marksmanship. If she'd had her normal gun or her new one hadn't had a faulty sight, she likely would have had a clean headshot. She pleaded guilty, though she said she was only sorry for throwing away her own life. In 2007, she was released on parole and later explained her reasoning during a 2009 appearance on The Today Show, as she said, "The Vietnam War, I became immersed in it. We were saying the country needed to change. The only way it was going to change was a violent revolution. I genuinely thought that shooting Ford might trigger that new revolution in this country."
We really truly thought there was going to be one.
Would-be assassins can come from all walks of life. Violet Gibson, for example, was born a noble, her father being the Lord High Chancellor of Ireland between 1885 and 1905. She was even a debutante in the court of Queen Victoria at age 18. But things spiraled after the death of her brother. She lapsed into periods of extreme grief and was prone to bouts of hysteria. She had a nervous breakdown in 1922 and was committed to a mental asylum and declared insane. 2 years later, she moved to a Roman convent where she was obsessed with the ideas of martyrdom, convinced that God wanted her to kill someone. In 1925, she shot herself in the chest but survived, and then her obsession shifted to Benito Mussolini. On April 7, 1926, Gibson wore dark clothes as she headed to find Mussolini after he'd just given a speech on modern medicine. She carried a gun and a black veil and a bottle of poison, intending to glorify God with his death. As Mussolini walked through the nearby crowds, she jumped out and took 2 shots at him. The first grazed his nose, while the gun misfired on the second. Mussolini was entirely unconcerned, and the police escorted Gibson away. She was diagnosed as a chronic paranoic and returned to England, where she died in 1956. Born to black sharecroppers in Georgia on June 14, 1916, Izola Curry moved to New York in search of work at the age of 20. But she wasn't able to hold a job as she bounced around the East Coast for years, moving from one job to another. That probably had to do with the paranoid delusions that hounded her. Those same delusions also probably convinced her that the NAACP was a communist front keeping her from finding steady work. She even wrote to the FBI about her concerns, which began focusing on civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King Jr. in particular. On September 20, 1958, Curry walked into Bloomstein's department store in Harlem, armed with a steel letter opener and a loaded pistol in her bra. King was there signing copies of his book, and Curry plunged the letter opener into his chest. It was actually a bit of a miracle that he survived. She was arrested at the scene and was later deemed unfit to stand trial, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and an IQ of about 70. She was committed to a hospital for the criminally insane and moved around institutions for the next 50 years, dying in a nursing home in 2015. The 1972 attack at the Munich Olympics, perpetrated by the Palestinian terrorist group Black September, resulted in the killing of 11 Israeli athletes. Mossad, Israel's national intelligence agency, wouldn't let that go unpunished as they launched Operation Wrath of God to eliminate those behind the Munich massacre, a mission that was dramatized in the 2005 film Munich. Undercover agents tracked down Ali Hassan Salameh, the chief of operations for Black September in Beirut, Lebanon. On January 22, 1979, Erika Chambers, a Mossad agent posing as Penelope, set off the bomb that killed Salameh, his bodyguards, and a bunch of innocent bystanders. Then she completely fell off the map. The truth about Chambers remains shrouded in mystery. It's most likely that she was a British citizen, attractive to Mossad for her non-Jewish name and appearance. Then again, fake papers are common in the world of espionage, so it's hard to say for sure. Chambers' parents know nothing, and her brother has refused to answer questions. All that can be said with certainty is that a British passport for Erika Chambers was found in Penelope's apartment after the mission. Grigory Rasputin was an advisor to Tsar Nicholas II, who's also known for some wild legends, like the myth that he just refused to die. Part of that myth comes from his assassination. He might have ingested a bunch of cyanide to little ill effect and survived 2 point-blank gunshots, and then fought against his attacker. He finally died from a shot to the head. This was all in addition to multiple stab wounds. The other part of the Rasputin myth comes from an earlier, less successful assassination attempt. Khioniya Guseva was a Russian peasant who had her eye on Rasputin. When he arrived in his hometown to visit his family on June 16, 1914, she followed him. One day, shortly after he'd dined and was en route to reply to a telegram, she attacked him out of nowhere by driving a knife into his abdomen. She reportedly screamed, "I have killed the Antichrist." But she really hadn't. Rasputin was still very much alive. He ran off as Guseva kept chasing him through the streets until he beat her off with a stick. She turned herself in and was declared insane and then placed in an asylum. Killing Eve's Villanelle has earned legions of fans thrilled by her stylish deadliness, and she was actually inspired by a real-life assassin. Idoia Lopez Riaño was a member of the Basque nationalist group called the ETA. In 1984, she registered her first political kill at the age of 20. She became a lieutenant in the ETA's Madrid cell and joined an especially ruthless commando unit that attacked and terrorized multiple cities across Spain. With her striking eyes and luscious locks, Riaño became known for seducing police officers, luring them into bed and drawing precious information from them via pillow talk. But the policemen weren't the only ones taken with her looks. She was rather smitten with herself as well, and she reportedly even missed a hit on a police officer because she was too busy admiring her own reflection in a storefront window. Ultimately, she was arrested in 1994 and convicted of 23 counts of murder, though she was released from prison in 2017 upon renouncing violence and expelling herself from the ETA in the process.